Steve, I feel like 2 years ago, if somebody had asked me when I was like hostessing at a restaurant in Soho, or had told me that I was going to be talking to the former chief strategist of the president of the United States of America, I would have been like, is he taking a reservation? Or no, it's this is kind of crazy.
This is what we call a fourth turning.
Hello, Zer0 Books readers and viewers. This video will cover the reaction to Steve Bannon's recent appearance on the Red Scare podcast, the left's internal culture war, and the truth about Reggie's plan to create COVID-19 in a secret Nintendo lab and make sure that Animal Crossing's New Horizons was a bestseller.
Warning by hello, it's me, Reggie.
This is the emergency broadcast system. Stand by for further information.
They die in droves on the freeways, and in each flu epidemic and each heat wave, and with each mistake of those who adulterate their food, and each technical innovation profitable to the numerous entrepreneurs for whose environmental developments they serve as guinea pigs. Their nerve-wracking conditions of existence produce physical, intellectual, and psychological degeneration. They are always spoken to like obedient children, always willing to do what they're told as long as they're told that they must do it. But above all, they are treated like retarded children, forced to accept the delirious gibberish of dozens of recently concocted paternalistic specializations, which one day tell them one thing and the next day perhaps the very opposite.
In 1967, the radical Guy Debord's book, The Society of the Spectacle, was published. In it, Debord theorized that contemporary capitalism had moved into a new stage of its development, one wherein the system of commodification that defines capitalism as a mode of production had colonized the subjectivity of its consumer citizens, rather than experiencing the world as an integrated whole, a terrain for one's own activity. The new consumers found themselves in a world that was pure spectacle. What once was directly lived has moved away into representation. A good way to understand this is to consider Animal Crossing and how popular the game has become, even amongst adults. Now that we're sheltering in place at home to avoid getting a really bad flu and dying, what Animal Crossing provides us is the spectacle of a life lived for us. A cute and pleasant small-town life, wherein even the animals have learned to get along as equals. The lion and the lamb are friends here. The tradition of creating art that conjures a nostalgic vision of a simple and fulfilling life of fishing, pulling up weeds, and slingshotting balloons in order to unwrap sofas or cuckoo clocks has a long history. But today, this Switch game version of social existence is more than just a supplement. It's a psychological shelter for those who have been ordered to stay at home. Of course, according to Debord, this artificial life isn't new, and our separation from our lives and each other isn't caused by a virus. Rather, the spectacle of false reality, our separation from ourselves, has been technologically and politically advancing since the end of World War II. In her 2017 book, Kill All Normies, Zer0 Books author Angela Nagle critiqued internet culture along lines that roughly matched up with Debord's theory and conclusions. She wrote about how the internet produced spectacular images and avatars that mutated at such a rate that only small subcultures could keep up, and even then, only partially. For instance, the proliferation of gender options, while alienating to many, was cherished by a few subcultures and picked up by corporate curators of the spectacle, such as Facebook, in an effort to make sure there were silos of unreality for every possible demographic. Rather than people working to create the material changes necessary to overcome the old gender roles, the image of gender diversity could be gazed upon in wonder. We weren't emancipated from gender roles but were freed to choose amongst them.
What else is in the news?
Should we touch
I've
on it?
honestly just been looking up Red Scare on Twitter and seeing what mean things people are saying about it.
Dasha, do you name
compulsively.
search?
Yeah.
Likewise, the proliferation of a radical left consisting of podcasters and YouTubers transformed what could be a struggle to change society into a clickable menu of identities and choices within the world as it is. Different audiences want to hear different stories about society. The aim of the podcaster or YouTuber is to collect rent from these audiences, and consequently, the media personality is driven more and more to repeat one or the other narrative about the problems we face, rather than bring the different aspects of the problem together. Both the decision to interview Steve Bannon and the reaction to the interview can be understood from within the realm of Animal Crossing or from within the realm of the spectacle. We can ask, why did Red Scare interview Bannon? We can conclude that the women involved with the podcasts are crypto-fascists. Or we could decide that interviewing Bannon was acceptable as they subjected him to tough questions and helped to undo his brand, to reduce his influence. But what doesn't fit within the realm of Animal Crossing, within the spectacle, is Bannon himself. One thing about Bannon is true. He is an historical figure, which is to say his activities have changed history, even if the way he's changed history is by helping along the project to freeze it and thereby kill it. We can object to Bannon's appearance in our Animal Crossing game, or alternatively, we can try to figure out just what Bannon represents and why, even as he fades, his ideas are on the rise. In Leo Cookman's upcoming book, Times Lie, he writes that the left needs a better narrative or a better story. Unfortunately, the story the social democratic left is telling itself right now is not fundamentally different from the story Steve Bannon is telling.
What I want you to do tonight is see or listen to why this is so dangerous. Because it is against the established order. It's against the established way things are. And I think that's what frightens people. I think it's what scares people. September 18th, 2008, the Oval Office. Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke, Secretary of Treasury Hank Paulson, a guy I used to work for at Goldman Sachs, walk into the Oval Office a couple of days after Lehman Brothers was put into bankruptcy in London. They tell him, by 5 o'clock tonight, we need $1 trillion in cash. $1 trillion in cash, or the American financial system is going to implode in 48 hours. The world financial system will implode in 72 hours. And in 2 weeks, we'll have global anarchy and chaos. They accomplished what Kaiser Wilhelm and the Japanese military junta and Mussolini and Hitler and Mao Zedong and the Soviets and Stalin, all of them, Osama bin Laden, they accomplished what the Judeo-Christian West greatest enemies could not. Now, how did that happen? It was the elites and people like you and me, people that bought into the system.
Errol Morris's film, American Dharma, was not a significant departure for the director of The Thin Blue Line, The Fog of War, and The Unknown Known, but it was maybe the first film where his subject was a target for deplatforming. The film was originally released in 2018, but it only found a distributor late last year. In it, the former White House strategist explains the ideology behind Trump. Bannon goes over the animating myths and ideas that brought Trump to power, and that he's working to spread to Hungary, Brazil, France, and even to Mexico. In the film, Bannon discusses the failures of the 20th century, and specifically the rise of what he calls the globalist elites. he tells about the wasteful carnage that these elites have left behind as they've wrecked the world. For example, he spoke of the Vietnam War and how American soldiers sacrificed their lives and the lives of the Vietnamese for nothing. He said, "We sacrificed millions at Vietnam, thousands of our own, and for what? For the right to lose jobs to Vietnamese sweatshops?" What Bannon leaves out is the reason the United States invaded Vietnam to begin with. The U.S. wanted Vietnam to have close economic and cultural ties to the West. America and France wanted a political ally and economic partner. They wanted a puppet. Ho Chi Minh, on the other hand, wanted Vietnam to be independent, both economically and politically. That is, from the perspective of U.S. capital, the use of Vietnamese labor for the production of U.S. goods is a victory. Bannon is confused about what the Vietnam War was about and about the nature of political and economic power. Still, Bannon tells a compelling story about the ascension of a globalist elite, a story that might be very familiar to leftists, especially to leftists who follow Marxists like Richard Wolff or David Harvey.
Is it correct to say that Keynes understood the importance of the social contract, social bonds, keeping the society, whereas the neoliberals really made war on, whether you call it the common good or whatever?
Right. Well, I don't attribute that too much to Keynes. I mean, Keynes wanted to protect capitalism, but he saw the way to do it was to make sure there was a balance between capital and labor. And in order for there to be a balance of power between capital and labor, you had to empower working population. So he supported the empowerment of working institutions, trade unions, and the like, not because he liked them, but because he saw this as important to the preservation of capitalism.
And so you get this neoliberal project, which had been a marginal sect
Yes.
among economists. I think you would argue that its very premise was absurd from the beginning.
No, it was not absurd in
Well,
the
not
sense...
I'm talking about in terms of economic rationality,
in terms of economic
not in terms of
rationality.
power.
Well, no, I think as a political project, it was very savvy, and it was very, and it got a great deal of popular consent because it was talking about individual liberty and freedom of choice.
Well,
and
they
all those kinds of things.
conflated individual liberty and freedom with individual and liberty and freedom for the market.
Absolutely, and of course, when they talked about freedom, yeah, it was freedom of the market. I mean, basically, the neoliberal project said to the '68 generation, okay, you want liberty and freedom, that's what the student movement was about, we're going to give it to you, but it's going to be freedom of the market. The other thing you're after is social justice, forget it. So we'll give you individual liberty, but you forget the social justice.
Recast in the more simplistic language of Steve Bannon, this story of the rise of neoliberalism becomes a story of urban elites protecting themselves and their power against everyday people and small businessmen. It gets twisted into a story of urban decadence, liberal and hippie narcissism, and the failure to fully embrace the values of America that made it so successful, so industrious to begin with.
My focus on the historically dynamic character of capitalist society is an attempt to respond to the massive global transformations of the past 4 decades. These developments, in turn, can be understood with reference to the overarching trajectory of state-centric capitalism in the 20th century. From its beginnings in World War I and the Russian Revolution, through its high point in the decades following World War II, and its decline in the 1970s. What is significant about this trajectory is its global character. It encompassed Western capitalist countries and communist countries, as well as colonized lands and decolonized countries. Although differences in historical development occurred, of course, From the vantage point of the 21st century, they appear more as different inflections of a common pattern than as fundamentally different developments. For example, just one, the welfare state was expanded in all Western industrial countries in the 25 years after the end of World War II, and then limited or partially dismantled in the 1970s. These general developments occurred regardless of which parties were in power and were paralleled by the post-war success and subsequent rapid decline of the Soviet Union and the far-going transformation of China. Such general developments cannot convincingly be explained in contingent terms. They strongly suggest the existence of general structural constraints on political, social, and economic decisions, as well as of dynamic forces not fully subject to political control.
If Moish Pistone is right, if the rise of neoliberalism took place globally, even in supposedly communist countries, then it seems extraordinarily unlikely that its triumph was a result of contingent political battles. If we have already lived through one change to our capitalist political system that occurred in a way that can be considered automatic or unconscious, aren't we at risk of seeing a similar change occur as the current economic crisis has its way with us? I, for one, don't want to let society continue on unconsciously and just passively watch as history cruelly unfolds again. There are two important factors to consider about Bannon. The first is to realize that his interview with Red Scare ended with a pitch for his podcast. But the second is to consider how Errol Morris chose to end his movie on Bannon. In the end, Steve Bannon said, "There's going to be a revolution in this country. It's coming. You can't kick the can down the road like this." Of course, Bannon and his ilk, including those who mirror his ideology on the left, don't really know what revolution would mean. Our job, going forward, isn't to worry about whether the Red Scare podcasters are leftists or not. It isn't to make sure that nobody sees Errol Morris's movie, but rather it's to think through what that word revolution means. It's to think through what the revolution that's coming will be. The economic crisis that Bannon predicted is already here. Are we? Thanks for watching this Zer0 Books video. If you enjoyed it, subscribe to this channel and click on the notifications bell so that you'll be alerted whenever we release a new video. You should also consider supporting us on Patreon. Our patrons get access to our Inside Zer0 Books podcast every week and can get access to the Zer0 Books book club and help us to continue making online content from the left.